You are listening to the Free to Be Mindful podcast, which invites you along on a journey to learn of mindful living, grow in mental health, and inspire through personal growth. In a world where we can often feel much stress and overwhelm, this podcast provides bite-sized tips and real talk conversations, empowering you to embrace mindfulness and nurture your full potential. I'm your host, Vanessa De Jesus Guzman, licensed therapist, retired educator, entrepreneur, and mom of two. I'm passionate about helping busy moms reduce the overwhelm and to live life intentionally without losing their, well, here we go. Hello and welcome to the Free to Be Mindful podcast. I hope that you're feeling good, looking good, and doing better in this world than you were yesterday. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Nikia Smith. Nikia is the founder of Forged in Fire. She's an anesthesiologist by profession, but then when the pandemic took place and how that changed a lot of things for many of us, it changed for her. It made her realize how burnt out she was feeling and how she was lacking fulfillment in her life. So, with a lot of the changes that she shares with us in this episode, she then hosted a physician wellness retreat for female physicians of color and truly found joy in providing a safe space for vulnerable moments that a lot of physicians go through. Because so often, not only physicians, but we lose ourselves in our titles boss, mom, wife, colleague, and we need to tap into the things that bring us peace and joy. And once we can establish that, then we can transform into the best version of ourselves. I love that, Nikia. So, Nikia plans to continue this journey of community and connection amongst professional women of color through curated experiences that allow them to be the most authentic selves. And she hopes to inspire professional women of color to stop merely surviving, but to start thriving, that they can live the life they want, the life they deserve, the life that they work so hard for, because she believes that women will change the world, but they have to take care of themselves first. And obviously, I absolutely adore that because that's what I believe as well. We need to take care of ourselves first before we can serve others, whether that be our kids, our jobs, our families, whatever it is, but it starts with us. I hope that you enjoy Nikia's interview. Here we go. Nikia, thank you so much for joining us on the Free to Be Mindful podcast today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yay! All right, Nikia, we heard a little bit about you, but I'd love to give you the space to share a little bit about yourself and what you do.
All right. So I'm Nikia. I'm a physician. I work as an anesthesiologist and I live in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've been working as a physician for about 10 years. And although it's very rewarding, it is also very taxing and stressful. So I've just tried different jobs. I've moved around, and I've recently, as of a few years ago, been on a really intense self-care journey and trying to prioritize my wellness and my health because some things slide when you get really busy.
As we were saying, life will life, especially when you do start getting busy. Now, before we get further into that, I'm not sure if you get this reaction from other people, but anytime I hear anesthesiologist, like I really like tighten and tense up a little bit because all I can think about was my first experience with an anesthesiologist is my first C-section with my son, which was absolutely horrendous. I had an awful experience. But then my second one with my infant daughter was an absolute pleasure, and that woman knew exactly what she was doing. So do you usually get that adverse reaction of like, "Oh," or
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wow."
Yeah, I get both. People either love me or hate me depending on their past experiences. But most people that have experienced me walk away loving me because I try to take, great care and actually listen. Because I know a lot of people felt like they weren't listened to in their experiences or their pain wasn't validated. So I am very mindful of that as I practice. And I do think it's a great position to be in as a Black woman.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. I wouldn't have unless you did, but since you went there, both as women of color, I feel like, especially in the medical world, sometimes either pain isn't validated, as you were saying, but also you're not really seen as much. So I just want to highlight and acknowledge that, and thank you for, being where you are and doing what you do, because it's nice when you see somebody on the other end. I'll share, and I always share with all my doctors very publicly that I'm really intentional about picking providers of color for myself. Sometimes for my kids, I am not able to do so, but for myself, I am intentional with that, and take great pride in saying that I do that very intentionally.
That's amazing. I as well will select and try to, select a person of color, first a woman of color, then secondarily a person of color, just to let them know that I appreciate them and respect them and see them. 'Cause although in some areas you may never have experienced that, and overall, women physicians, Black women physicians are like less than like what 1%. I think we're two. We went from 1.8 to 2.3%. So,
I'm glad there's an improvement, but we
yeah.
need to work on that, people. We've got to get that up.
I know, because you say we
It's
were the
insane.
1%, but then it's like, oh no, we're 2.3% now. Yay.
But yeah, take great pride in 2.3, but we need to work on that because that is a really quite amazing. And that's a national stat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
And so
hear
I guess
you.
whoever they surveyed who identifies as a woman of
Right.
color, you know.
Right, right, right. I hear that because I don't know the statistic, but I know it's quite low of Latino, Latina, whatever, however you want to say it, but people that identify within that group as a therapist, especially as a woman, there's not a lot of us out there either. So I'm glad we're out here doing our thing and hopefully inspiring young girls to to do more.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it is inspiring. And I think, like you said, it brings a level of comfort to the patients. And I think one of my patients one time took a picture of me to show her granddaughter. And I was just like, okay, I'm famous. Like, not really, but she was just like, you're my first Black doctor, like, ever. And, like, a
Wow.
Black female at that. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, so
Wow.
it does hit, sometimes the heartstrings. I'm like, wow, like, this is a big impact for people, even though for me, it's just
Absolutely.
my day-to-day life.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So happy, and thank you again for acknowledging that and giving me the space to go deeper in there. So as an anesthesiologist, I mean, thinking just as a therapist, it took me forever, I felt like, to get to where I am. And then you said you experienced burnout and that's what you work on now. But let's talk about that. Tell me what happened that took place to get to that burnout space.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's like burnout is not all or nothing. People think it's kind of like, oh, I'm going to be burnt out one day. And burnout is really like a slow burn. It's like leaving a
Mm-hmm.
pot to boil water, but only putting it on like one or two. So you're just like, oh, nothing's happening, nothing's happening. Then you get the small bubbles, and then suddenly you're roaring. And so it is a slow burn. It takes a while, but then once you hit it, you're just like, boom, you hit a wall. But like the education takes a long time. I was an undergrad for 4 years, medical school for 4 years, training for 5 years. And all along the way, they keep telling you, oh, like at the next level, it gets better. Oh, once you leave residency and you're a fellow, it gets better. Once you leave a fellowship and you become an attending, it gets better. Oh, once you leave your first job for your second job, it gets better. So they keep telling you it gets better. And I was like, when is it getting better? Like, it's not getting better. So I took a job in Las Vegas 3 years ago, thinking that it was the dream job, the good job. It was described exactly how I had envisioned my life would be. And so
Okay.
when I got here, I was like, this is nothing like what you told me. And I
Wow.
was working so many hours, so many weekends, and I finally like just got to the very edge of my exhaustion and I burned out.
Wow. And from what I remember when we chatted, you moved from one state to go to Las Vegas for this job.
Yeah. Yes, I left Maryland, and so we moved across country for this job with the idea that this was the job that I had been looking for. And then when I got here, I was severely disappointed. But
Ooh.
yes, I guess it was what I needed, right? Like I had to be pushed to the actual brink of like my exhaustion and burnout to realize it was a problem. Because once I burned out and I looked back, I was like, oh, like I was changing jobs and doing this stuff because I was already burnt out and I was looking for that reprieve. And, I wasn't really going to make big changes outside of changing my job unless I hit this point. And I really just don't want other women to hit that point before they make these changes.
Yes. And oh my goodness. And there's so many things in there. I think about it takes me back like when I was a teacher and school counselor, it's kind of like you stay in that one position unless you go and get the extra certifications and the extra classes and licensures to be, let's say, an administrator. So you kind of like stay in that one position. But I hear you, and I feel like not that we're the same as an anesthesiologist and therapist, but again, all the education, the certifications, the licensure to get to where you are. And then it's kind of like climbing this never ending wall that you keep climbing. And like, where's a reprieve? You keep climbing. Where can I take a breath? Where can it get better? Where can either, it's not always about making more money, but it's just like living a healthier lifestyle and feeling okay that like, all right, I've made it. But you're sounding like you moved here, you moved there, and you made it, but you didn't feel like you had made it.
Yeah, and that's the thing about success, right? Like society will tell you what it is, and that's how you figure out what it is by watching movies, by going out.
Hmm.
So these people with big house, flashy cars, designer bags, you're like, oh, if I just keep working harder and making more money, I'll be successful. And although you may be externally successful with your titles and your roles and your degrees and your money, but like on the inside, I was just dead tired. I was just like,
Mm,
this is crazy. Like, and how much longer can I do this? I really cannot do this for 30 more years. Like, that's insane.
yeah,
So then I was just like, how did I get here? And I'm like, oh, because I'm chasing these measures and these titles and this money, but I'm actually not chasing the things I actually want, which is like more time with my family, more freedom to travel, and time to focus on my health. So I'm like, how did I end up like like you said, it was climbing a ending ladder, but I was like going up the wrong ladder. So I was like,
right.
let me back it down and figure this out.
Yeah. And that's really hard when your career has so many steps, like that you were talking about, like schooling and then residency and doing this and doing that. And you're climbing and you're climbing and you're climbing, but the ladder isn't moving. And that's something that, regardless of what our listeners and our viewers today do in their professional lives, we really need to make sure that we for ourselves, and this is individual, so it's not one size fit all, that we for ourselves think about what does success look like for me, feel like for me, what does it sound like to me? Because right now, even though with a 3 month old, I am tired. I'm tired, tired, tired. However, being 40 plus, owning these businesses and having an infant that they told me that I would never have, it is success to me. So success sounds like that crying at 3 a.m., even though it kills me sometimes. So that's different for me than it may be for somebody else or for you, let's say. But we need to make sure that we define that to make sure that we're living fulfilled lives, because if not, it's kind of like episodes of Walking Dead, and we're just like, zombie walking all over the place and not really feeling much inside.
Very much. It definitely is like a zombie walk. You're kind of just like, what the heck? But yes, redefining success and what it felt like it meant for me was definitely very monumental in my journey. Because that's when I realized, like, oh, I want to live like a long, healthy life, but I've been neglecting all that stuff because work kind of came first, studying came first. Oh, I can't do that. I have to prioritize usually working
Mm,
or studying for taking tests and all of this
right.
stuff. So I was like, oh, I'm working harder, I'm making more money, but I'm not actually striving towards what I think is successful, which is, a long, healthy life. So trying to figure that out and balance that out was really, instrumental in the journey.
Yeah. So Nikia, tell us about that moment when you were just like, oh no, this is not,
Oh
cannot
yeah.
happen anymore, right? Where you were saying like the pot kind of bubbled up, and then what happened?
Yeah, so the moment for me was like it's very, very distinct because it was just like such a horrible, one of those days, and it was a never-ending day, but it truly was. I ended up working close to 20 hours straight,
Wow.
and when I got home, I was just like, "What?" Like I was just like, what is this? Why am I just now getting home at 3 a.m.? I've been out since 7 a.m. I've been working all over town, doing all these cases. I am so tired, but this is just crazy. And so as I was like thinking, I don't know if anybody else does this. I mean, I think a lot of us do this, so I'm just gonna say, but I was
Okay.
just sitting in my car, like, you pull into the garage, you sit in
And
the
just
car,
sat.
kind of just like, what the heck happened today? Today was like, what? And then I just started screaming, like rage
Ooh.
screaming, like, I mean, louder than that. I was like this rage screaming that turned into
Wow.
crying. And I was like, you know what? This is not my life. Like, I don't accept this. Like, this is not it. And so
Wow.
it was intense. Yeah. It was very intense. I went home, I passed out, of course. And then like the very next day I was like, okay, I cannot stay at this job. Like,
Mm,
number one is like, this job is done. So, and then number two is just like, okay, what else can I do? So then I got a therapist, which was very, she's still my therapist. She's great. I actually have therapy too. So she's really great. And she's been with me on the journey from like the very beginning. Cause that was my first time getting a therapist. And and then she kind of helped me work through some of the stuff, the mindset stuff and the trauma of training, and that I didn't realize was trauma.
mm.
And so that was part of it. Then just getting podcasts and books and kind of educating myself about burnout, and then actually prioritizing my physical health, because I had been saying
Okay.
for months I was going to do Pilates, and I never did it. And then I was talking to a friend and she's like, yeah, I went to Pilates. And I was like, you did what? And she was like, I went to Pilates because all you do is talk about it. So I figured I would give it a try. And then she's like, I was like, so I talk about it all the time. And she just went and did it. And that, I was like, okay, I gotta just go do it. So then I started doing
Hmm.
Pilates and trying to prioritize my physical and mental health. And that was just like the beginning. It was just a little bit here, a little bit there, therapy once a week, working out twice a week, leaving my job, searching for a new job, and then slowly weaving in my own, self-care rituals and
Yeah.
routines.
Yeah. Before we go further, and thank you so much for being vulnerable and really sharing your story. I truly do appreciate it because I think it's in sharing our stories that we learn and uplift one another. So I really do want to honor that. And I want to make sure that people know, like, that sitting in your car. Yes, I've totally felt that. I don't think I've ever screamed in my car, but I've totally cried in my car and just like having that moment of release. But I want to make sure that listeners and viewers understands that that is like a significant thing. And like you remember that, obviously we all remember those big moments. And sometimes it is those outward things, but sometimes we don't scream, right? But we're slowly crumbling and we're slowly almost like it's almost like we're made up of different puzzle pieces, and these puzzle pieces are getting lost and burned and like just, the puzzle isn't together again. And that can happen, like you were saying at the beginning, over the course of time. And sometimes it's very quiet, but we want to make sure that, and this is mindful living, having the awareness of what's happening within ourselves, like you were saying, physically, mentally, emotionally, and then having the courage to do something about it. So you had the courage, you stepped out to get therapy, you were doing all these things, and then did you see a change right away, or did it take a while?
I mean, I think I actually saw a change right away, but back to what you were saying, I agree. It's because that was a monumental moment, but in therapy and in reflection, I realized it had been building, right? I had been
Mm,
becoming more exhausted. I had been becoming more irritable. No amount of sleep made me feel rested because it
right.
wasn't lacking sleep. I was just drained emotionally, right? And then the things I used to find joy in doing, I didn't even want to do them anymore. Right. So that's all how it ties in. So in therapy and in learning about, burnout, I realized like I probably had low level depression or functional depression or whatever you want to call it.
Sounds
But
like it.
yeah, so like, but when I look back, again, that was the event. That event made me realize, but I,
Right.
I was having changes that I noticed through therapy, through education, through reflecting. Like, oh, when I learned about this, I'm like, oh, that was me. Like 3, 6, a year ago, not just in
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah, yeah. And it's so important for us to know what our baseline is, right? Because let's say if because sometimes that gets confused. So I want to take this and make it an educational moment for listeners. Sometimes we're like, oh, wait, but I'm an introvert and I don't like to go out all the time and I'm quiet. And if that's your baseline, that if the baseline changes, that's what we want to pay attention to, right? If that's just how you are all the time, then that's how you are all the time. But once we see the change and you see like the crumbling and the pieces, and oh my goodness, I'm just not who I used to be, even if it's a little bit, that's when we want to start paying attention to before, because that's like the tip of the iceberg before we see like the full bottom. And then, we're the Titanic slowly drowning in the middle of the ocean by ourselves, or we don't want to get to that. So
I want to
I'm
get to
glad
that.
that therapy was helpful.
Yeah, she's really great. I'm happy to still be with her.
Awesome, awesome. And you made more changes, your physical changes, and then finally realizing, okay, this is burnout and I've been through all of these things. Then,
So this is burnout. I've been through all of these things, and it was like, okay, I know what I need to do, but I actually have to do it, right? Like I have
mm,
to get this courage to quit this job. And then you have all these thoughts like, you idiot, well, my inner critic is very mean. So just you idiot, you moved all the way across the country for this job and now you're just gonna quit it. Like, so I'm like, so now I'm facing my inner critic and my
right.
negative self-talk, which is also why I saw my therapist. But so we move through that for the actual courage to overcome the negative thoughts and take the
Mm,
action, which is looking for new jobs, quitting. Well, first I just told them like, I'm not happy here. If we're gonna continue like this, I can't stay here.
right.
Like that was my first time just actually voicing my feelings and my opinions and my thoughts about the work environment. And they were like, "Oh, we're gonna change some stuff," and so they bought like a few months, but of course nothing changed. So I
Uh,
was like, "Well, if nothing changes in 2 months, I'm giving my notice." And so they didn't change anything, so I gave my notice. um, I started, like you said, started sharing my story with my friends, realizing that I wasn't really alone in these thoughts
right.
because that's one of the things that my inner critic would tell me. Like, well, nobody else is struggling. You're the only one struggling. So maybe this is a you problem.
Mm,
Um, and then you're like, well, I want to say anything then, right? Because if it's me, then I want to say anything and reveal myself. But once I just got the courage to share my story, I realized other people were also struggling. And just by sharing my story and validating their experience, I was
yes.
helping somebody. So that was like part of the journey as well. Like,
Yeah.
okay, now I've gotten courage to quit my job, share my feelings, share my story, and just kind of put myself out there. And that's just how, like, the next level of, I guess, my journey began, which is becoming more vocal, helping women through coaching and community and hosting retreats, and just trying to touch as many lives as I can. Like I said, because I just really don't want anybody to get to that point where you're sitting in your car, rage crying and
Right.
screaming. Maybe we can just
Yeah.
notice, earlier on when you're starting to get more irritable and you're not, I am an introvert. And so I don't go out as much, but I used to sit and read. And so if I'm sitting to read and that's how I recharge, like I wasn't reading. I didn't read a book for 2 years. So
Wow. Yeah, you want to pay attention to what you find joy in. And then
mhm.
when you see that changing, not for the better, that's when we need to, wave our little flag and say, help.
Yeah,
I
so
need some help here.
there's definitely times along the path where you can notice and make the changes sooner. And that's just what I'm hoping to do on my progress, on my journey
Yes.
business.
Yes. And before we hear more of, what you're doing now, I also wanted to point out how easy it is for us to, let's say, if we finally build that awareness and say, like, help, not even asking for help, but just saying, oh my goodness, like, this is not okay. How easy it would have been for you to be like, oh my goodness, what are the people going to say? I
Yeah.
moved cross country and I am in this position or I do that. And now I want to make a shift. And now I want to like completely drop it and do something different. And sometimes many of us get caught in that, what are the people going to say mold? And that sometimes can be a little bit dangerous because then we're no longer living for ourselves and making ourselves happy, but instead then making other people happy, which really does nothing for ourselves in maybe in the short term, in that moment, while you get your pat on the back, but not in the long term. So like that was amazing that you had the courage to make that shift.
It's, yeah, definitely not easy. That's why I definitely need my therapist to talk about that.
Yeah. And now, so like turning the page. So now you've taken all of your experiences and how are you helping other people now?
Yeah, so my first business venture, I would say, was a retreat for women physicians of color, and that was just basically after I shared my story, I was like, well, I quit. I'm taking time off. I'm going to this resort to do all of these things, open my chakras, do sound bowl, clear my negative energy, sleep like I've never slept before. And so then everybody was like, oh, I want to go too. So my self care retreat became an open retreat for physicians.
Amazing.
that's how I just kind of got started. So as the business is evolving, I will still host wellness retreats, but I am also now a certified coach. So I'll be coaching women in a group coaching mastermind, and I am opening a community in the fall for women who just want to connect with other women, have a safe space to share their stories. I'll do monthly challenges and workshops and empowerment, all of the good stuff that I felt like would have helped me years ago.
So, so, so amazing. I don't know who the author of this quote is, but I hear it so often where you turn your mess into your message, and you've definitely taken your experiences, what you've learned, validating yourself, and then also like just making it real for people. Like, yes, people can go through this, and this is now how you take care of yourself. That is beautiful.
Yes, thank you. And, it's a process. Yeah, it definitely is a process. But
Yeah,
thank you
and
for
these
what you do. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's definitely some days are heavier than others, but I do enjoy it. And it's wonderful to see the change, when you can help folks and you see that shift happening, sometimes quicker than others. And even when it's over the course of many years, it's always a beautiful thing to see. The retreats that you have now, are they specifically for women of color, and are they for just physicians or anyone?
So moving forward, they are curated and designed for women of color. So if you are not a woman of color, but a supporter and an advocate for women of color, you are more than welcome to come. But that is the intended audience. And so that's kind of
Okay.
conversations will flow, right? Um,
Uh-huh.
Honestly, my facilitator for my retreats, for three of my retreats, she is a white woman, and she's just she understood, and she is very clear, and we've had no issues. So I just say that, like, it's not like it's closed off, but like when the discussions go that way, that's what we're there for. So
Got it.
just if you feel like you might get offended easily or take things personally, and you're not a woman of color, it may not be the best space for you. But overall, there's been a few white women in our space that have felt the message and have felt very
Right.
comfortable.
Right. It's wonderful that you know exactly who you're serving, and that you set it up. And then if people fall into that category and get it, they can benefit from it as well. So that's wonderful. And besides the retreat, or in addition to the retreats, how else do you enjoy living a mindful life and taking care of yourself?
So it is definitely a process. I try to remind myself to be mindful because it's so easy to fall back into the normal routines and habits that keep you distracted. But I
Mm-hmm.
do now incorporate routines and rituals into my day, which I think are very helpful. And so I try to at least do one activity for my mind, body, and soul per day, and it would be maybe, like I said, actively reading. I read almost every day now, so that's very much covered as far as my mind. But reading,
Okay.
I do puzzles. I try to do creative activities, which sometimes are easier than others. But like if an event comes up that's kind of creative, I'll like to go like paint and sip or make a candle, stuff like that, because I do enjoy things like that. And then for my body, like I do Pilates 3 times a week, and then I'm really, really, really right now focusing on getting a daily stretching routine happening, even just for 5 minutes. So I'm really trying to focus on stretching. And then for my soul, it's really kind of easy for me being an introvert. Like just connecting with one person very shortly is enough to fill my soul.
Mm.
So usually just talking to friends and family on a daily basis is kind of how I keep my soul full, because I do find I get recharged by like deep and meaningful connections.
I like that you are intentional about the different areas that you want to fulfill and how you go about doing that and what feels good for you, because that can change from day to day. I'm also happy that you did get into the Pilates.
Yeah, I
So
know.
you
I'm like,
finally did make it.
I finally did it, and I loved it.
That is so, so, so awesome. And I hear you when it comes to keeping your mind active. And as I want to believe gracefully age, now that I'm on the other side into the other side of 40, I feel like that's not only really good for you right now, but definitely for later as well. And I find myself, my husband makes fun of me and says I'm a little old lady, but sometimes I get, whether it be the printed version or the electronic version of People magazine. I don't
Oh,
read any of the articles. I don't care about any of the articles, but I love love. This is like a secret of mine. I
Huh?
love the last page where it has a crossword puzzle, but it's not like hard like the New York Times. It's like all pop culture. And I take such great joy in like sitting doing the people crossword puzzles. And it's fun, and it motivates and stimulates the brain to hopefully keep it young and active.
Yeah, you gotta stay agile, like mentally and physically.
Yes.
So I do think, so I mean, I do, don't get me wrong, I love my Netflix, but I'm like, I need to stop for a moment. Like, I'll just pause it and go do a puzzle for a second just to get my brain thinking in different ways. And I haven't done crossword puzzles, honestly, but that just makes me want to do one. So thanks for mentioning that. I'm gonna add that to my list.
But I only like the fun ones, only on pop culture.
Yeah, fun
And
ones,
it makes
not really
me
hard ones.
Yeah, not really hard ones, not really hard ones. And it makes me use my brain without like thinking too hard. I guess that's why I like those. But I really like again how you keep it intentional with the different buckets, you will call them, on really taking care of yourself. And stretching is like underrated. I feel like I remember once saying, and I don't do it every day, which I really should, but once I said like if I followed my teenage, years of when I would do it, probably in gym or something like that, because it keeps you agile in all types of ways. So definitely
Just
something
waking
that
up,
people should do.
your back and neck hurting. You're like, oh no, okay, the age is coming in. I was like, I gotta start stretching now, like
Simple
now.
stretches. That's it. I love it. And Nikia, if you could be remembered for one thing on this earth, what would that one thing be?
Oh, see that thing has changed a lot recently. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, for one, like the only thing I want to really be remembered for, like I'm doing a lot of legacy thinking, so but like I just want to be available for my niece. I know that's like not a big thing, but in the past I haven't been available. Like oh, can you come? Like no, I have to work or I'm on call or
Right.
whatever. So now I'm just like moving forward. I mean, not at her whims, but like for the meaningful things, I would like to be available. Because I was talking to my mom and she's like, has mom guilt? And she's like, I feel like I missed so much stuff. And I said, well, all the things that I remember being memorable, I remember you being there. And
Mm.
she was like, "Oh, that's so sweet of you to say that." I said, "It's not. It's all I can remember. Whenever I felt like I wanted to look for you in the crowd, you were there. So whatever you missed, don't even worry about it. But I want to be like that for my niece. Like I want her, like whenever she starts being like, oh, every time I looked up, you were there for like my recital, my graduation, whatever. So that is the thing I'm working towards now.
That is so nicely said. And just being there for the people who count on you being there, especially for their big moments. And that even when we're long and gone, hopefully they'll remember that. And that's legacy right there. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for asking. I haven't really thought
Yeah.
about that.
That's one of my deep questions there as a therapist. So now, thinking about, you mentioned that you had all these things coming in the fall. Please share with us, where can people find your retreats and where can people find you should they be interested?
Awesome. Well, you can find my website. It's www.sheisfireforged.com. And I'm on socials, Instagram and TikTok at She is Fireforged. And I also have a separate Instagram account for me. It's more tailored to like the medical aspect of my life and my journey. And that's at Nikia Smith, MD.
Thank you, Nakia, so much for sharing all those. We'll be sure to place them in the show notes so that everybody can follow along. And I am so happy that your journey took an optimistic turn and that you're using that for the better and helping other women. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you for all you do. I would definitely not be this far in my journey without my therapist. So if anybody's on the fence, just give it a try. There's no stigma. I swear there's not. And thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here. Thank you again to Nakia for joining us and for sharing her vulnerable and very real story. And again, I love that she has turned the mess into the message. And for our guided meditation today, I want you to think about that. Where are the areas that perhaps you beat yourself up on? The areas where you think of the shoulda, woulda, couldas, where you want things to maybe look, feel, sound, and be different? And how can you perhaps let go of the expectations and just allow the what is? Having faith that things can get better as you're doing that work. And in addition to that, the other aspect of our guided meditation that I wanted to bring to you today is how she said to just be there, to let go of that guilt and be there when you can for the people who look up to you. And sometimes for moms, that's our little people that eventually get bigger than we are. Know that whatever you can't make, then it doesn't happen, and that's okay. But they're going to remember the moments that you were there, not the moments you were not. So many times as moms, we beat ourselves up, and we can use that space and energy for other areas rather than living in that space of beating ourselves up. So taking those two aspects of Nikia's talk today, think about which one resonates the most for you. After this podcast, just spend an extra moment thinking about how you want to implement that in your life. And remember, my friends, that in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Catch you next time. Free to Be Mindful exists because of viewers and listeners like you. If you're enjoying the podcast or felt this week's show resonated with you, please take a moment to leave a rate and review on the platform where you catch your favorite shows. That quick and easy act allows me to see what you're enjoying so I can deliver more personalized content that focuses on learning, growing, and inspiring. It also helps others find the podcast too. Don't forget to subscribe so you can listen along next week. And if you can do me the favor and share this podcast on social or with a friend who may benefit from the message shared today, that would be truly appreciated. In the meantime, I welcome you to follow me on social media across all platforms at Counselor V. De Jesus for more fun content. And remember, my friends, in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Catch you next week.